You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I'm Dustin and Tony is with me, and we are here to cover everything from April 22nd through April 28th. We have a number of news bits to cover from the variety of different streaming services. We also have a couple of smaller discussions, but we're going to get to that a little later on. Let's jump into the news. Starting off with Netflix. Netflix has announced their next partnership with the Obamas, which is a memoir documentary series about Michelle Obama, dealing with her book that she wrote. Netflix has picked up a British royal family episode of Thomas and Friends, and there's a quarantine anthology series called Social Distance from Jenji Kohan, who is the creator of Orange is the New Black, that is also coming to Netflix.
Doesn't that quarantine anthology series just seem a little bit too soon? It just seemed, when I was reading the article, it kind of made me cringe a little bit. I was like, how is this going to work? Because it just seems a little bit too over the top, unless it's going to be like a self-aware documentary, I guess.
I can only imagine that it has to be self-aware, otherwise I don't see how this is going to work. Based off of what they've described it as, they are currently writing and putting together what they're going to do for this anthology series now while people are in quarantine. And they're going to be having the people starring in the series film their parts at home while they're quarantined or under a stay-at-home order. I personally just don't see the success of this. It almost feels like this is a reaction to the SNLs at home and how the ratings for those have been pretty high, but I don't know that the ratings are very high for those because they're producing this amazing content that everybody wants to see. I think it's more of there's not a lot of things out there for people to watch that's fresh content, and SNL producing content from home is kind of in its own right attraction to see whether or not it'll work or not. As typical Saturday Night Live goes, some works, some doesn't. That's just the way it goes. But I feel like this is like a reactionary measure to something like that, where, okay, yeah, see, a broadcast station can record a show that we're going to air on television, during primetime television on Saturday night. We can do something like that too, and that's what they're doing. I'm not saying it's specifically that. It just feels like it's a reactionary measure towards it. I don't understand what the necessity for something like this is. It's one thing for some comedians to poke fun at the fact that they're stuck at home doing whatever they're doing, but it's a whole other thing when you've got, a show that is talking about being stuck at home and it's expected to be watched by people who are stuck at home. Like you said, it's a little cringy. So, all right, as far as Prime Video, there's nothing. Hulu, nothing. CBS All Access, nothing. Apple TV Plus. Apple TV has landed The Shrink Next Door limited series, which is going to star Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd, and this is based off of a podcast.
This is another series that is based off a podcast, and frankly, it's the first one that seems interesting to me. I mean, the other ones, okay, they pique my attention, or I'm excited that they get the same voice cast with Tessa Thompson in whichever one that she's in. But the premise of this, podcast now series, it seems pretty awesome, and I'm happy with the cast that they have and stuff like that. So I'm very excited for Apple. They have good stuff. It just doesn't seem that they're getting as much publicity as some of the other competitors in the streaming wars.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they're going a different route as far as where they're looking for content to, because this isn't the first podcast series, and that's not to say that other people aren't. The Tessa Thompson one that you mentioned, that was Prime Video that picked up that one, but there's obviously, we've talked about a number of different podcasts that have been picked up by streaming services to be adapted into a television series. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I will admit, I'm right with you. This one does sound probably one of the more interesting ones that has been announced as an adaptation of a podcast. Not that some of the other ones couldn't. We'll see what ends up happening, because this is stuff that's going to be developed over time. We're probably not going to see some of these things for at least a year, if longer. But the premise of this one sounds very interesting. All right, jumping over to Disney Plus, there's a female-focused Star Wars series that is currently in the works. This is going to be put together by Leslie Headland, who is the creator behind Russian Doll. And there was some stuff that, let's just put it this way. There's some people online who were not very pleased with this. I personally don't think it should be a problem, but...
Yeah, it's sad. For me, more Star Wars is always the best. I know that some people are still... they have conflicting thoughts about the new series that came out by Disney, but overall, I think a lot of the fandom is happy that more Star Wars is the best, just in general. And it's unfortunate that, just with the announcement of this, that they've gotten a lot of flack from people complaining about it being female focused and stuff like that, which I think stinks. It takes away from what they were trying to do and trying to usher in a new era of Star Wars content for everyone. So I think it stinks, but overall I think Disney's smart with going back to the well with one of their cash cows. I mean, Star Wars has consistently made them money since they bought Lucasfilm. Same thing with Marvel, the MCU when they bought Marvel. So I think it's great that they're going back to that cash cow and just creating more content in that universe. This is very smart, especially for their streaming platform. You know, another Star Wars exclusive series. It's a great business move once again.
All right, jumping over to Quibi. Quibi has announced that they have ordered a new satirical news show featuring comedian Nish Kumar. And then Quibi has also announced that after 2 weeks, they have jumped to 2.7 million downloads. And they have confirmed that TV casting will be coming in May to some users. Now, they say some users because they didn't make it very clear as to how casting will be, whether it'll be like Google Cast or Apple AirPlay. They didn't say specifically how it's going to work, but they said some users, which means somehow that's implying that there will be people who won't be able to do it. May is right around the corner, so we should be able to get some more details here very soon. It seems like every week they're giving new updates and we're hearing new things from the executives at Quibi, so we'll see what happens there.
When they release a new software product, they're probably going to release it to just a small group of users. So basically trying to get some alpha or beta tests out there just to see, okay, like how's it going, collecting data to make sure that the new changes are working the way they want them to, and then they will release it to everyone. But you got to also remember that there's a lot of different protocols out there for sharing stuff wirelessly. I mean, Apple's got their own thing, and then Google's got their own, and some of these other providers. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's nice to see that they are actively working on it. And, you know, Katzenberg himself has said that they're working on it. So we already heard Whitman saying that, but it's nice to hear the guy who was very wrong on casting basically come full circle. But 2.7 million downloads, I think it sounds great, but when you do the math, it's like at minimum if they keep the same amount of people after the trial period to actually pay, there's going to be a minimum of 13.5 million or the maximum of $21.6 million of gross revenue. And that's based on if everyone just gets the $5 tier, or everyone gets the $8 tier. And then you have like the in-between range of if people who get the $5 to the $8. But once again, if you just round numbers, 14 million and $22 million of revenue, gross revenue. I mean, after you pay the staff and you pay infrastructure costs of servers and whatnot, like they're going to make like next to nothing. And so, or just nothing, or they're going to be very, very negative. Like it's not a successful business, you know, in terms of like revenue generation. And I'm curious what number are they trying to get to eventually? Like what is their break even point as a business? I'm just skeptical of just the short form content of that business environment of, okay, how many people will actually pay for this in the long run, and will they make their break even point? Because they're really pushing it, and it's great tech, and I've enjoyed some of the shows, but honestly, it's not for me. And I deleted the app the other day just because I realized I wasn't going to use it. So I'm just curious what their break even point is. We've heard other companies to hear that they're not going to be profitable for another potentially like up to 5 years, like Disney Plus or something. Although I think they're probably going to reach that target a little bit sooner. But it's streaming's hard, and they're going to lose a lot of money. And I'm curious if they can keep up this rapid pace of raising cash and spending it all again. I'm just, you know, like what is their break even number? I'd love to hear that in an investor call.
Yeah, and the thing is, we won't hear those details because they're not a public company. So the investors that they're talking to are just the companies that are financing them as a whole. Now, I want to put this into a bigger perspective. So, you know, $14 to $22 million is what they could be bringing in every single month. Let's see if every single download actually translates to a single person who's actually subscribing to the service. service. Some people could, have it on multiple devices. If you have a account, while you might only be able to use one account at a time, you might have it on your phone, you might have it on your wife's phone or your partner's phone, or you might have it on somebody else, you might have it on a tablet or whatever, so you can watch it on a larger screen. The thing is, not every download translates to a single subscriber, but that, of course, is the entire basis of this number is inflated to begin with, because there's that 90-day free trial, which means not everybody's necessarily going to stay on to the service after the 90 days. Let's just say, for example, that they somehow got to, let's say, 10 million subscribers as a whole. As a company, they were somehow able to get to 10 million subscribers at some point in time. On average, if they were bringing in about $5 per subscriber, I know that obviously there will be people who will pay the premium price at the higher price point, but let's just say it was $5. That's only $50 million a month, $600 million a year. That's how much money they bring in. Now, obviously, their ad space could go up depending on the count, but we know that their entire ad block for the first year was sold for $175 million. That means even with 10 million subscribers, they would only have, with their current ad blocks, about $800 million on the higher end. That could be a little bit higher, but they would have to bring in they'd have to have at least 10 million subscribers in order to even get close to that number. The thing is, I don't know if that's a realistic number to begin with, because the problem is that this service by itself is such a complicated thing. And I've spent a little bit more time on Quibi. As I said in the last couple episodes, I've been continuously watching the news reports from BBC and NBC every single day. I find them informative. I enjoy them, dedicating just maybe 10 minutes to watch. It's not that much time. However, I did this past week notice that a number of the series that they launched with have wrapped now, and I didn't realize that was the case initially. I talked about last week how there was certain series that had already finished, but now here we are a week later, and there's even another bunch of stuff that is now finished as well. Some of the top tier premium content that originally launched with Quibi, like Most Dangerous Game, Survivor, Free Ray Sean, which was actually a week 2, 50 States of Fright. That was also a week 2 one. These are series that, were their top tier. Week 3, the only top tier content that released was the Anna Kendrick series Dummy, and that was it. This week, there was no top tier content. The stuff that they released is kind of the mid tier unscripted stuff. There was a Jonas Brother one, there was a dance one, and there was a sports series as well, but that's what released this week. And I'm wondering to myself, how can they constantly maintain this influx of new content? Obviously, they're banking on the daily essentials really being the thing that people are going to constantly be taking a look at. The issue is that outside the daily essentials, which obviously are happening every single weekday, the problem is that there isn't a lot of content that's going to be added over time. Sure, they launched with a good slate of stuff, but a lot of that stuff is now wrapped and they're done. They don't have any new episodes already pre-done. They don't have anything. And I honestly have a problem thinking to myself, how are they going to maintain people's interest with only releasing a couple of new series every single week? And they only last for like 8 to 10 episodes or something like that. I don't see it working long term for them. Like, even if a show takes off and is super popular, it's not like they can immediately go film more episodes because there was interest. Right now, they're in a situation where they don't even have the capabilities to go film more content because of everything going on with COVID. So for me, I just don't understand how they can keep producing the amount of content with such a short amount of episodes. It'd be one thing if they did like Chrissy's Court and they had like 60 episodes that they did because they're all like 6 minutes long, and they just, they recorded them all ahead of time and they're releasing them over time. But that's not the case. There was only like, I think 15 episodes or something like that for Chrissy's Court, which was one of the more popular series on the app. The premium stuff, the Most Dangerous Game, I watched. It was not bad, but honestly, it was a B movie. It wasn't like a super popular movie that would have ever been able to make a ton of money in the theaters or anything like that. It's just the content that they currently have available. So for me, it just comes down to, I question Quibi's potential for success because the fact that they've launched with so many shows, they talked about how they launched with so many shows. If you were a subscriber from day one and checked out a bunch of these shows, what are you going to keep checking out as time progresses if they're only releasing a little bit of stuff every single week? I don't know. But the biggest thing is, going back to the numbers, even bringing in $800 million a year with the amount of content that they'd have to produce in order to keep people engaged, I don't think that's enough. I mean, we hear about Netflix, the behemoth of the streaming services, spending upwards of $20 billion in content, which is obviously way, way higher than what Quibi's is. But even at Quibi's level, they're talking about how they needed to raise $1.75 billion in order to make sure everything was running smoothly going forward from their investors. And I'm thinking, okay, but if they spent, let's say, half of that on content, and they've said they have enough content through Thanksgiving at this point, how are they going to afford this long term? Like, I get that the investors that they have are mostly production companies who are obviously being paid back the money by creating content for Quibi, but it's a very weird situation for Quibi to be in long term. Like, they're going to have to bring in a lot more money at some point. I imagine they're going to try to do an IPO just to bring in a lot more money, but I just don't know how that's going to work because I just don't see this taking off as much as they wanted to.
Agreed. I completely agree with you on just pretty much everything. I lost interest in the content. I mean, I was really interested in Survive and The Most Dangerous Game, and The Most Dangerous Game ended, and I gave up the app because just the new stuff wasn't interesting to me. I really tried to give Quibi a chance. It just couldn't make it work. And so there's going to be a great amount of churn that's going to happen. And I'm curious how they're going to handle that. Yeah. For those who don't know what an IPO is basically when the company's going to go public, and they do that to really raise a whole lot of cash. And that's what they're going to have to do, because I'm very suspicious about how many rounds of funding they can do to really sustain the amount of content that they need to push for. So that's a great idea that we will be looking out for in the future is Quibi's IPO, because they're going to have to raise cash, and investors are going to stop giving them $1 million, $2 billion essential loans. So I'm curious about that in the future. Probably going to be later this year when we're probably going to hear an announcement on that. That's my guess.
But it really is going to be dependent on the success after this trial period, because if they don't have the subscribers, at some point they're going to have to disclose how many subscribers they actually have, even though they said they had no intention of disclosing those numbers, because if they want to do an IPO, they have to tout their success, and these download numbers by themselves, especially during this situation where they're giving away a free trial, it's just not going to work. All right, HBO Max. There's a couple of different things. HBO Max has teamed with Connie Britton for a documentary project based on All the Single Ladies. They are also developing an adaptation of Jake Taper's Hellfire Club book that he wrote. HBO Max has purchased a film pitch called Catching Out. They have also purchased the Sony comedy film An American Pickle, which was set to premiere in theaters in June before, obviously, the pandemic changed things up. Because of that, Sony has decided to sell the film, and HBO Max has been the ones who have picked it up. No word on when exactly that film will be coming to HBO Max, but one could assume that it could be sooner rather than later, considering that film was planned to release in June in theaters. All right, one other real quick thing related to the theatrical window, which we'll get back to this theatrical window in a little bit, but this doesn't really fall specifically with HBO Max, but more Warner Media as a parent company. So we've talked about a number of movies that have been adjusting their schedule, that the main production companies within Hollywood have been shifting around their release schedules for the theatrical releases because of everything going on. And some of the things that we've seen is that there are certain films that have decided that they're just going to skip the theaters and instead just release directly through digital for people to purchase. The first big one that was announced was Trolls World Tour, which we'll get back to in a little bit. But there's been a couple of other ones. My Spy from STX Films is going to Amazon. They purchased that. Lovebirds from Paramount is going over to Netflix. And then American Pickle from Sony is now going over to HBO Max. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that there's only been so many films that have not been sold off to a streaming service. Trolls is one, and Scoob, the new Scooby-Doo animated film that was set to supposedly start off a Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe of some sort in animation form. That one was supposed to release in May in theaters, and now it is also skipping the theaters completely. Instead of adjusting and coming out some other time, it's going directly to paid video on demand, where people will be able to purchase it for full price and not be able to rent it right away, but they'll be able to purchase it for full viewing. And the reason I'm bringing this up specifically is because in some articles I read, it assumed that this would be this project would be paid video on demand for a certain amount of time and then eventually become an HBO Max exclusive. And while I do believe that the film will end up on HBO Max, I don't think it's going to happen as soon as some people have guessed it would. Some people have said that they expect it to hit HBO Max within a month. I don't think that's going to happen. Almost every film that Warner Brothers is putting out is going to end up on HBO Max at some point, because most Warner Brothers films go to HBO for their first viewings outside of home releases. So I think Scoob will end up on HBO Max, but I don't think it's going to happen a month from the time it's available for purchase. So just keep that in mind. Another thing that was announced for HBO Max is that they have decided to condense their marketing, their efforts for, based off of everything going on with current events. They had the rollout of HBO Max. They were planning on having tie-ins with March Madness and Major League Baseball's opening day and all of these other things that were going on. And they've all, obviously a lot of those things have halted or are no longer happening. So it's not happening. So their marketing plan is just basically relying on the content that they have, not necessarily the original content, but the library of content that they have, and they're going to be strongly focusing on that and then using influencers to kind of push things along as well.
It either was Stinky or somebody else at Warner Media that said what's really going to help them out and set them apart is that they have HBO in the name. It's like we got HBO in our name. Everyone knows who we are, and they know what type of quality to expect. And given the limited amount of marketing that they have, given everything due to COVID-19 and stuff like that, it's just it's a really good time to have HBO in your name. And so I think that their launch is going to go off very well due to the fact of, oh, you got HBO in your name? Okay, I know what that's about. So, I was trying to explain that today to some of my coworkers of what HBO Max was. They hadn't heard about it, but when I told them about HBO Max, and it's just, at minimum, it's going to be easier just to watch HBO content. They were like, I'm on board, I didn't have to tell them about, original series and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, you get all of HBO content plus a more backlog of Warner Media content and more movies and then original shows. They were sold on the service. I made that sell right there. So, but overall, you got HBO on their name. They're going to do well.
Yeah, it definitely is all about that name recognition. Obviously, HBO is going to help. There's still people out there, including myself, who believe that a more encompassing name could have been better. But HBO by itself will by itself bring a lot of people to the service, knowing that not only are they getting HBO, but they're getting a ton of other content as well. It's definitely going to tip the balances and get people to really be interested in the service. The other big news from AT&T was that their CEO, Randall Stevenson, is going to be stepping down. He's going to be retiring, and John Stankey, who's currently the COO, was formerly the CEO of Warner Media. And it turns out that as of July 1st, Stevenson will remain on the board for a little bit of time, but he will be replaced as CEO by John Stankey on July 1st. They will not have John Stankey be the chairman of the board. They will be looking for somebody else to fill that role because they want to keep those roles separate. When I saw this announcement, the one thing I thought was kind of odd was back in October, I remember listening to the investor call for Q3 of 2019, and I remember hearing something about how Stevenson was not going to leave the company before 2020. And I just kept thinking, I remember seeing that, and I pulled it up, and it said that he was supposed to remain chief executive through at least 2020. So the fact that this is happening in the middle of 2020, not mentioning the fact that it's happening, the announcement comes out before the launch of HBO Max, which AT&T has been touting as something very significant to their long-term business, and the fact that there's a current pandemic going on, it seems like it's a very odd timing in my opinion. I don't know the reason other than just to get things moving forward that were already planned, but it just does seem interesting that just in the last 6 months, things have changed to a point where this is happening in 2020 while Stevenson was originally stating to the board that he was going to stay on through at least 2020. So
yeah, there are a couple of different ways you can look at the situation. It's just, if this move was always already going to happen, then I guess it really doesn't matter when Stanky will or would have taken over, just because of just the continuity there. However, just from the outside, it's just like, why would you step down before your new product idea gets launched? Just for me, it's that's a little bit concerning. If you look at comparison to a different company, right? You have Disney. Bob Iger stayed for the launch of Disney Plus for a few months, and then he retired from the role and moved to chairman. And so that's a little bit surprising, but overall, I don't think it's that big of a deal in terms of stability for HBO Max and Warner Media as a whole. I think it's going to be good for them. I think from the outside perspective, people will have questions, but I think that those questions I don't think people should really worry that much. I think people will have questions. I just think that they just shouldn't. It's probably just poor timing, but if you're gonna make a change, you're gonna go make it. So I'm at least happy that HBO Max is just, it's like, hey, we want all the ducks in a row before we launch, and Stinky's their man, and here we go. At least Elliott Management is happy with him as the replacement, and is happy with HBO Max and the direction that's going. Because if that's not the case and they were not happy with him, that would not have been good. Elliott Management, for people who don't know, they were the ones who put up a really big stink in the last couple quarterly calls with AT&T and really talking to them about their excessive amount of debt and the strategy about HBO Max and really questioning Stevenson's leadership. So, but all that seems to be resolved and they're all on good terms. But at least that Elliott Management really likes Stinky, so that's good.
Right, and finally for HBO Max, they have set another distribution deal, this time with Apple. So if you are an HBO subscriber through Apple, if you specifically subscribe through the App Store, you will actually have access to HBO Max without having to change anything. You will immediately have access to HBO Max when HBO Max launches without any need for creations of new accounts or anything like that. This is in addition to obviously all of the AT&T customers that will be brought over to HBO Max as well. And then obviously the Charter Communication one that was announced that we talked about last week. Moving over to Peacock, there is nothing. The niche streaming services, first up, YouTube has announced that they will launch a slate of new originals. These are all based off of content that was created before COVID-19, but they're being marketed as COVID-19 content specifically because the content that they're rolling it out during this pandemic when a lot of people are staying at home. But to be clear, it is content that they had planned. They actually, YouTube Originals got a new head of content, and they came in to basically shake up what they were doing. And in the process of doing this, they had to basically create a whole new slate, and that's exactly what they did. And this slate has actually been rolling out for a little bit of time, but they have a ton of new content that's going to be coming out in the next couple months. So keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I was a little bit confused when I first read this article because I was like, I didn't know if it was specifically related to, hey, YouTube is going to create more original content, or, hey, everyone's at home. We know that you're watching more YouTube because of COVID, and so we're going to make COVID, not like COVID inspired, but like, YouTube's going to be, nice and make you content. I was a little bit confused at first about their current offerings, so they could have done a better job. Man, I think he did a good job of explaining what their true intentions are.
All right, and then another service, IMDb TV, has ordered their first original series. Now, if you're not familiar with IMDb TV, it's actually a service that's owned by Amazon, but it's a free streaming service that offers content with ad support. Their first original series is actually going to be a reboot of the 2008 series Leverage. I personally have not seen it, but I know you have.
Yeah, it debuted on TNT, and I saw it, and I thought it was hilarious. You had the Ocean's movies that were coming out, and everyone loves just heists and stuff like that. And so it was nice to see a bunch of thieves steal from, bad people and to try to help others. And so it was just a quirky, fun show. It was kind of sad that it ended, but the ending left it to where there could be a sequel that would happen from it, or if they rebooted the franchise, I think that'd be fine too. It's just one of those shows that's like, oh, okay, like it's got a good premise. There's a good amount of people who like the original, and it seems like it could be either rebooted or made into a sequel pretty easily. And so I think this is a safe and good choice by Imdb/Amazon to do this again. So I'm happy about this, and I'm definitely going to check it out. So I'm going to check out Imdb TV. I'm going to check that out.
All right, and then there was no other news related to other streaming providers, but we do have, like I said, a couple of discussions. So the first one is Netflix has announced their Q1 results. The big takeaways from this is that over the first quarter of 2020, they've actually added 16 million subscribers, which is a huge number of subscribers. But they also warned that despite the fact that they had this huge increase of subscribers, they're specifically saying be cautious about growth going forward, because let's be honest, if you're not subscribing to Netflix during this situation where a lot of people are stuck at home, you probably are not going to be subscribing to Netflix after this. So their growth is not likely to grow much further than it currently is at this exact moment. They also announced the day after they gave their Q1 results that they're going to be purchasing another $1 billion in debt. And they stated that as far as production goes, they do have everything that's basically planned to release in 2020 has already been filmed, and editing and all of the post-production is already in place remotely so that they can continue to do that. But they did state that there are certain areas in the world, including South Korea and Iceland, that have reopened production for certain things, and they're looking at those areas of the world and the restrictions that are in place and what's working to roll that stuff out in future regions that they're filming in so that they can continue to have production continue in other areas of the world. So, Q1 results, anything that you saw that you want to mention?
Global pandemics are good for business if you're a streaming provider.
True that. Yeah, that's very true.
Just trying to make light of the situation, but it's just a terrible thing. It shows that there are some amount of people who have taken to staying at home more and have elected to spend their free time at home watching content. I think that's really much all that we can say, is that there's some people who are listening to their local officials about stay-at-home orders. To me, that's all we can really say. I think it's good that streaming is a thing, and we get to have it during this time. I feel like if we had the same situation but about 10 years ago, a lot of people would have struggled to just have fun at nights. It's a long days, a lot of people working from home, and you trying to want to watch some type of content, and clearly cable is not offering that right now. I mean, poor Jimmy Fallon and all the late night TV shows. It's like all a bunch of Zoom calls, and they're doing the best they can, but it's just not the same. And I think cable TV has really struggled during this time, whereas in streaming is really done pretty well because of they have a little bit of a buffer in terms of content. So I think since Netflix is the leader of the pack, we're going to see Netflix is going to have the biggest jump out of all of the streaming providers. But I think across the whole, if we see everyone's Q1 results, or at least the whatever quarter that covers between like February to the present, we're going to see a bump in terms of numbers. I guarantee it, just because of the state of the world, just Netflix being the king. They're going to see just, eye-popping numbers. So that's my take on that. I think that if they, at the end of the year though, I think they're going to run into a content shortage. So I'm really curious what they're going to do. I think that's something they have to be worried about. And so with their large production capacity, I wonder when other parts of the world kind of have the all clear to go back to work and do production, I wonder how they're going to create content for the rest of the world. I'm curious about that. Their debt sale, I think that, frankly, if people are interested in economics in the United States, the federal interest rate is almost zero, or it is zero. It's loan, the interest rate's cheap, so it makes sense for some of these companies to get loans. Netflix is probably going to do it anyway, and given great growth and low interest rates and the fact that they probably just need to in general, they're just going to get just $1 billion worth of loans from, really it's just it's called senior notes, I think. but it's just basically selling tiny bonds. That's essentially what's going on. So it makes sense that they're going to do it now. They're in a healthy position. They seem to be in a healthy position just projecting forward. And so just take advantage of low interest rates. It makes complete sense why they're going to get debt right now. There are some people who disagree with the strategy just because they've taken on a lot of debt. And although they are a safe company, they probably should start to paying down a little bit of that debt. But I feel like they're safe right now. So once again, it just all makes sense. It's great for Netflix. They happen to be at the right place at the right time. And unfortunately, the right time is how much sadder the world is right now. But overall, this is great for Netflix. I don't have any more complaints from them. I think they're doing great. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see that they grew. It's not a huge surprise. I mean, Disney Plus has been growing leaps and bounds since they launched in a variety of different regions. I imagine the next time we hear from Disney, they're going to be touting their Disney Plus numbers because they don't have a lot of other things to tout. So I can expect their numbers to get a huge boost too, like you said. But I imagine that, other companies, HBO Max is right around the corner. They're coming. They're going to have decent numbers out the gate, I assume, even with just the free versions that they're handing out to certain AT&T customers and things like that. They should have a significant number of subscribers too, because while they're launching at the end of May and there's certain states that are relaxing their stay-at-home orders or changing their stay-at-home orders and things like that, the idea of the future is not the same as it was as the past. We're going to be doing social distancing for quite some time. So the reality is these streaming services are going to be a popular thing for people. It really is going to come down to how many of them people can actually afford. How many of these services will people actually subscribe to multiple different ones in order to have multiple different options of content? Will they drop one and start another? We heard about how Disney Plus was going to be the Netflix killer before it launched. And while we didn't agree with that, we thought that the market could maintain both of those. When you look at HBO Max, they have a wide variety of content, and it is more expensive than Netflix. So the question is, will people who are subscribing to HBO Max be dropping Netflix? I think that's a better question than the people who are subscribing to Disney Plus. Would they be dropping Netflix? And obviously there was this whole thing on social media about people unsubscribing to Netflix and subscribing to Disney Plus. Personally, I think that was it was unrealistic to last long term because it's not, Netflix has a lot more content and it reaches a lot more demographics than just families and children and things like that. So I think that with Netflix, it'll be interesting to see not only the fact that their growth numbers are not going to continue to go up significantly quarter after quarter as they have for such a long period of time, but when you look at the competition of HBO Max coming in, you look at the fact that, as we move forward, the economy is going to be very much in a recession. People are going to have to start cutting spending on extra things, and the streaming services could be something, or it might be one of their only avenues of entertainment because, the idea of going to concerts or going to, large public gatherings and things like that is not something that is going to be something that a lot of people are going to be comfortable with doing in the very near future. So we'll see.
True. If you think about it, there's going to be people are doing their budgets. I mean, how many of us are eating out? I mean, I love coffee, and so I usually go to a coffee shop, a couple times a week, and it's like I'm not spending that money now weekly on coffee, so I can spend that on streaming services. Exactly. So even though that there is people's income is going to decrease probably, or there's a good many of them that's going to decrease as time goes on. As we cut through our budget, it's like, well, due to social distancing, there are some things that we can't do. Like go to dates, go out to eat, go to movies and stuff like that. So that money, I think, for the short term is being reinvested in these streaming services. So if things get more dire, I could definitely see streaming services being cut. But due to that, they're pretty much the only thing besides board games that people do at night. True, yeah. I think that rising tide lifts all boats. I said that right as the COVID-19 began, and that's what's going to happen. People are going to invest in streaming services as their entertainment for the future, because there are going to be a good amount of people that, yes, although they've been told that they can, quote unquote, rejoin society, they're definitely going to stay at home. And I think that that's going to become a new normal for the next half a year to a year when things are died down. It's crazy, but with more income, or at least less, income going to, social activities, that's going to be reinvested into streaming services. I'm curious if there's any economic research on that. That's just kind of like my intuition on things. it'd be interesting to get back. Anyway.
All right, so our secondary discussion really isn't it's not really a discussion. It's more of I just want to let everybody know about this, and it doesn't fall within streaming services specifically. Going back to what I was talking about earlier when we talked about Scoob under HBO Max, Trolls World Tour is a film that was meant to release in April in theaters, and NBC Universal decided to forego the theaters because of what was happening. Instead of moving the release date, they decided to make it available on PVOD, which is paid video on demand, which means basically anywhere that you can buy digital films, you can purchase it and you'll be able to watch it right away at your house. If I remember correctly, I believe the film was $25 when it released, and you would think to yourself, okay, so if are you going to go pay $25 for a film? There's plenty of digital films that go on sale and they don't cost $25, but this film, brand new, never in theaters, it's a higher premium price. As you would imagine, the theaters were not very happy about this. NBC Universal continued to say in the marketing that it was going to be available on demand the same day it was in theaters, even though all the theaters were currently closed. So there was already kind of feathers that were getting ruffled because it was clearly not in the theaters, despite the fact that they were using that as part of their marketing plan. The theater owners were not very happy about this. As I said, Scoob is going to be the next one that's coming out. I believe May 15th is when it's releasing on paid video on demand. But then there's other films that have just decided to go sell the rights to streaming services. We named some earlier. The reality is Trolls World Tour ended up raising in the first 3 weeks it was available $100 million. That puts it on the path to basically be profitable, make its money back. And the biggest thing is, which a lot of people don't realize, is that $100 million almost directly goes to NBC Universal. So the reality of it is, this presents an interesting thing because in NBC Universal's eyes, this was a profitable way to make a bunch of money and cut out the middlemen. And we've talked about this before about how cutting out the middleman saves you a lot of money, but when the middleman has control over, a larger thing, such as release of other movies that you want to make much more money on, is it a reliable thing to go about this rate? Well, to basically put in perspective, Trolls World Tour, like I said, made $100 million. The CEO of NBC Universal, Jeff Shell, came out and said, this could be the new norm for movies or certain movies because it's clearly a profitable way to do business, and we can make profit off of these movies rather than risking it going into the theaters and not walking away with as much money as we could. That part is interesting, but then there was something that developed right before, this afternoon, right before we recorded, which was AMC Theaters came out to say that they are banning Universal films from their theaters for the future, not just during this pandemic or anything like that, because they are so upset about the fact that the CEO of NBC Universal stated that this could be the new norm with these films. And I honestly, like I've said before in the past when we've talked about this, I do believe that low to mid-budget films are going to be going the way of streaming services and maybe even this model of paid video on demand because there is more profit. So I honestly do believe that this could be a thing for the future, whether it be paid video on demand for certain films that are a little bit more mid-budget films. But I honestly believe a lot of lower budget films are going to be going the way of streaming services because there's a streaming service for almost every major production company out there at this point. And if there isn't, there's studios like there's services like Netflix and Amazon that would go about purchasing films for some of those studios that don't have a streaming service. So I just wanted to bring it up because I think it is something to keep an eye on, and it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward.
Yeah, I can agree with you more. I think that this is going to be an interesting fight when it turns into one. I'm curious how the industry is going to respond to AMC and how AMC and their partners are. I can see this potentially blowing up to something really huge, and so we're going to keep a close eye on it. But from Universal side, they had to make money off this project, and so you could push it down the road again and again and again, but at some point you got to just do the math and see, was it the best thing for them? And clearly it was. And so of course it makes sense that more lower budget movies were to be moving to streaming. I mean, we've seen that already. How many Netflix movies pop up all the time and you're like, wow, that's very low budget. I mean, it's okay. It's all right. It might be really good, but it's still like very, very, very low budget. We've seen that trend happen for the longest time now. But I think paid video on demand is going to be the first alternative to movies not releasing in theaters. I could see people on streaming platforms being like, all right, for this 3-month window, you can pay $7.99 or some number for it. So I could see that happening. I see the industry moving that direction. But yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's going to be interesting to keep our eye on as time moves forward, especially with social distancing guidelines. Like, how are those going to be in effect? How long will movies be pushed down the road, and what studios are going to do? It's going to be interesting.
All right, so with all of that being said, there is a good chunk of trailers to check out. If you haven't checked any of the trailers out that we've been posting on Twitter and our Discord, you can check out the giant list of trailers I've released over the past week in the show notes. With all of that being said, be sure to follow us on Twitter and join our Discord to check out all the articles that we talk about here on the podcast, as well as articles that we don't get around to talking about on the podcast as well. You can follow us on Instagram for all latest announcements related to new episodes of the podcast releasing. You can shoot us an email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com with any questions, comments, concerns, topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes. And with all of that being said, I encourage you guys to continue to stay safe out there. For Tony and myself, this has been The Streaming Wars. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to The Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.